Okay. Alright, so where we left off, we have a situation where the king of Israel has been rejected by God. I mentioned before how I'm not sure, I really don't know. I mean, honestly, I really don't know. I'm not sure if God ever intended Saul to be the permanent king of Israel. You know, we read back in chapter 13 with Saul's first failure, when he did not wait properly long enough for Samuel to come to him at Gilgal while he's in the middle of a battle, and he offered sacrifices himself, which he was not supposed to do. That Samuel said that God would have established Saul. This is chapter 13, second half of verse 13. If you have not kept the command of the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established a kingdom over Israel for all time. Of course, God knew that Saul would not do this, so he didn't establish his kingdom for all time. Saul had the opportunity, though. You know, God did not force him not to follow his commands, okay? God knew he would not follow his commands, but he did not arrange it so that he would not follow his commands. He did not force or pressure or coerce Saul not to follow his commands. And so he failed there, and he failed again. Then we had that sequence of chapter 14 where he was rash and made this oath and swore his men to make a foolish oath. So that itself wasn't so much of a failure that he lost standing with God. And then he had the whole thing with the Amalekites in chapter 15, where he did not entirely wipe them all out. He kept the king alive, and he kept the best of the produce alive, the cattle, the goods. Samuel had to be the one to go there and set things right and straighten him out and kill the king of the Amalekites, Agag, or whatever his name was. Now, you know, it's a difficult teaching. You know, putting something under the ban means that it has to be burned up, it has to be destroyed, fumigated unto God, even if it's a living creature, even if it's a living person. And then Samuel just told Saul that God had rejected him. Now this is the second time. The first time it didn't seem to leave much of an impact on Saul. Second time it did. Saul was grieved or upset over that. He wanted Samuel to go back with him in front of the soldiers to save face and not give the appearance anything was wrong. And Samuel did. Samuel did do that. I'm not sure if anybody but Saul and Samuel knows that Saul has been rejected as king. Saul is still acting as king. Saul will be acting as king for quite some time still after this. He did not step down voluntarily. He did not retire from his office and go live and do whatever it was he was doing before he became king. He's holding on. And I don't see that Samuel has told anybody else about the change in king. And Samuel mourns for Saul. Samuel is upset about this. He's upset for Saul's sake. I think he's also upset for his own sake, because he anointed Saul, excuse me, these S names. Back when we were in Genesis and we had, Jacob and Joseph and Judah and then Joshua later on, all those J names got me confused. Now I have two S names that kind of get me tongue-tied a lot. It says at the end of verse 15, Saul mourned for Samuel. Or Samuel mourned for Saul. Excuse me. I think he's upset. I think he's legitimately upset for Saul's sake that Saul was rejected as king. I think that he's also upset for his own sake because he was the one who publicly anointed Saul as king. So Saul's failures could look bad on him, Samuel. I think Samuel wanted Saul to succeed, and when Saul didn't, I think that hurt Samuel. I think Samuel now is praying to God and mourning for Saul, but it's over. Saul will remain as king officially in terms of who is actually reigning as king and giving commands to the army and all that for quite some time to come. But in God's mind, the matter has already been settled. So here we are at the beginning of 1 Samuel 16. I don't know how much of a gap in time is taking place here. Let's actually end it by reading begin this by reading the last couple of verses of chapter 15 again. Then Samuel, after having put the king of the Amalekites to death, which Saul would not do, Samuel left for Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. Until the day Samuel died, he did not go to see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him. And the Lord was grieved that he had made Saul king over Israel. Then the Lord said to Samuel, now again, I don't know if this is immediately after, like that day, the next day, a week later, a month later, a year later. I'm not sure how long this is going on. I'm not sure how long of a gap in time there is between chapter 15, verse 35, and chapter 16, verse 1. We have a chapter break there. This is one of those things you have to remember that in the original text there was no chapter break. The chapter break kind of indicates, in our minds at least, that there's a bit of a passage of time. I have no idea if there was or not. I really don't. At any rate, here's what we're doing next. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. This is not the sort of horn that they blow to sound a signal or a trumpet-like thing. This is the sort of horn that they fill with oil and pour on people's heads to consecrate them and anoint them for a special purpose. But Samuel said, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and will kill me. So Saul knows. Now again, I don't know if anybody other than Saul and Samuel knows. Okay? Saul and Samuel were having apparently a private conversation in chapter 15 about the Lord's rejection of Saul. Saul wanted Samuel to come with him in front of the soldiers to appear like everything was normal, and Samuel, after some coercion and persuasion, did so. He didn't want to initially, but he did eventually. So I'm not sure if he's told anybody, or certainly I don't think Saul has told anybody that God has rejected Saul as king. But Saul does know, and Samuel knows that Samuel knows, Saul knows, Samuel knows that Saul knows, and so Samuel might very well assume that Saul has spies set to monitor Samuel's movements and report them to Saul, because Saul wants to know who the next guy. Saul doesn't know who the next guy is who's going to be king. Of course, neither does Samuel at this point, and Saul might want to know where Samuel is going so that he can intercept him and keep that from happening. Saul will hear about it and will kill me. The Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. Now, they will end up having the sacrifice. They will do this. This isn't, I mean, it is, I guess, in a way, a pretext or a pretense, because it's ultimately a way to get Samuel to be able to leave and travel without being pursued or annoyed by Saul. But he will end up offering the sacrifice. It's just he's going to be doing something else, too, at the same time. I don't know what kind of sacrifice this is exactly. Oh my, oh my, oh my, oh my. We read in Deuteronomy 21 about, if you read the first several verses of Deuteronomy 21, can't stop that, stop that, stop that, stop that. That you do sacrifice a heifer, a young female cow, in the case of an unsolved murder, and you don't know who committed the murder. You take the elders of the nearest town to where the body was found, and then they take a heifer and break its neck and sacrifice it. I don't know if it's that kind of sacrifice, or if it's some other kind of sacrifice that uses a young cow. Most sacrifices use bulls or goats or rams, male versions of the species, so I'm not sure what kind of sacrifice this is exactly. But whatever it is, they will be offering the sacrifice, and they will be having a feast. So it's not just a pretense, although it is. It is in the end a pretense. Because it's a means unto an end. The end is to anoint the next king. The means to the end is to bring this cow and offer a sacrifice and have a feast with it, at which time Samuel will anoint the king. Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders, now we already read about Bethlehem a few different times. Okay, we read about it in Ruth. Yeah, Ruth ends, let's see here, Ruth and Boaz are in Bethlehem at the time that Ruth takes place, when Ruth and Naomi come back to Israel, or Naomi comes back to Israel with Ruth after having been in Moab for a time. Ow, 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 ow. Ow, 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 itch in my ear. So when he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They're scared of him too. I don't know if they know about the public feud between Saul and Samuel, so they're afraid that maybe Samuel being here will bring Saul here. This is Judah, Benjamin, Saul was the king from the tribe of Benjamin. These are now Judahites. So they don't know what Samuel is here to do. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord." They recognize him. He's the seer. They know who he is. "Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Consecration probably means washing themselves, washing their clothes, and maybe spending a day, maybe 2 days without having sex. I'm not entirely sure. It basically means to make yourself holy, make yourself presentable to the Lord. Set yourself apart for a special... Remember, there's consecration and destruction. Consecration means to be set apart for a special use by the Lord. Destruction, being put under the ban, means to be set apart for the Lord by destruction. So he's talking to the elders initially, and he's telling them to consecrate themselves, and along with them is Jesse and his sons. I don't know if it's just them, or if they're part of this group of elders or whatever. When they arrived, the sons, the family, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." This is the guy. This has got to be the guy. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." Now, in Saul's case, his height was one of the primary qualifications for him being king. Okay, we read about back in chapter 9 and 10 and 11 when Saul was picked. His criteria seemed to be, the standout criteria seemed to be that he was tall. It's not the case in this case. I believe that God deliberately picked someone that he knew would end up not being a good king, to be their first king, to show them what a mistake it was for them to put their faith in a human king. That's my personal belief. It doesn't actually say that. The text does not ever come out and actually say that. But the preponderance of evidence to me leads me to believe that. Saul's criteria did seem to be that he was bigger than everybody else. And here, God is specifically saying, that's not my criteria. That was your criteria with Saul. I picked Saul based on your criteria for what you men are looking for in a human king. But that's not my... And Samuel himself seems to have been persuaded by that. Samuel, went with Saul, because God told him to, and he thinks that this guy is going to be the king because of that criteria too. So maybe this is a lesson that even Samuel needed to learn. At any rate, the Lord says to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance. But the Lord looked at the heart, or the mind. Remember, in the Bible, the heart is the seat of intellect and thought. In our day and time, this is where we keep our emotions. We think of the heart as being the center of our emotions. In their day and time, the heart was the center of thought. The center of your emotions was your belly and your gut. So when it says heart, it's not talking about his emotions or his feelings. It's talking about his mind, what he thinks. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Now, I don't know if he's told Jesse what he's choosing his son for. It doesn't say that. When they had that conversation a few verses ago, he just says he's here to consecrate, to offer a sacrifice and have a feast and consecrate themselves. It doesn't say necessarily what he's consecrating you for. I don't know when they find out that he's there to consecrate the next king. They may just think the seer of Israel is here to consecrate one of their sons for a special use. That's what consecration is. Doesn't mean that you're going to be king. It doesn't have to mean that you're going to be king. It just means you're being set apart for a special use. And they may not know what that special use is. He may not have told them. We don't have an account here that he's told them that. He's just doing this. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "Well, there is still the youngest," Jesse answered, "but he is tending the sheep." Now, that was oftentimes a girl's responsibility at this point in time. We saw Rachel do that back when Jacob first met her. We saw Moses when he left Midian, when he left Egypt and went to Midian, fled to the desert, that there were a bunch of girls coming out to deal with their sheep and water them at the well. Let's take a look here. Yeah. Chapter 2, verse 16. The girls came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And some shepherds came along and harassed them, and Moses fought those guys off. But in this case, David's doing it. Now, he has sisters. We will mention sisters in other accounts of David's lineage elsewhere in the Bible. But for whatever reason, they're not doing that. Maybe they're older, maybe they're married off already, I don't know. And David is doing that. Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down and eat until he arrives." So he sent and had him brought in. So he was so unimportant and so inconsequential that he wasn't even there when they settled around to have the sacrifice and this feast. They had to bring him in separately. He was ruddy, with a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David, that's the actual first mention of his name there, in power. Samuel then went to Ramah. So David has now been filled with the Spirit of the Lord. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord torment him, or an unclean spirit, injurious spirit. So what does that mean? Actually, let's finish this section first, and then we'll talk about what it means for God to send an unclean spirit. Actually, you know what? Let me start a new video here.